Turn off the camera! You are obstructing a police officer!
I have every right to record this conversation and your abuse of power.
Officer tased a veteran's wife for filming. 7 minutes later, the police chief arrived with an apology. Officer tasers veteran's wife for filming. 7 minutes later, sheriff arrives with apology. Turn off the camera! Officer Morrison yelled, his hand gripping the taser as he leaned through Maria's car window. You have no right to film me. I'm a cop. Maria's voice shook, but remained calm as she held the phone higher, the red recording light flashing. I have every right to record this conversation. I'm a pregnant teacher, and my husband is deployed in Afghanistan fighting for the freedoms you're trying to take away from me. I don't care if your husband is a general. Morrison growled, his finger hovering over the trigger of the taser. You're dealing with me right now, and I'm about to find out what happens when you disrespect a cop. What Morrison doesn't know is that Maria's phone has sent out an emergency alert to her husband overseas, and he's about to make a call to get the chief of police to the scene in just 7 minutes. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and like to hear how a call from Afghanistan brings down a corrupt cop and transforms an entire police department. Listen to the full story now. There are moments when power corrupts absolutely, when authority becomes tyranny, and when a badge becomes a weapon against the innocent. But sometimes, in just 7 minutes, justice arrives with sirens blazing and accountability in tow. This is the story of a traffic stop gone wrong, a veteran's wife who refused to be silenced, and a phone call that brought the entire police department to its knees. The sun was setting over the suburban streets of Riverside, casting long shadows across the well-manicured lawns and white picket fences that define this middle-class neighborhood. It was the kind of evening that promised peace and tranquility, where families gathered for dinner and children played in their front yards without a care in the world. But for Maria Santos, 34, this peaceful evening was about to become a nightmare that would test everything she believed about justice and the American dream. Maria was driving home from her job as a high school Spanish teacher, her mind occupied with lesson plans and the stack of essays waiting to be graded. In the passenger seat sat her purse containing her phone, which had become an extension of herself ever since her husband deployed to Afghanistan 3 years ago. Captain David Santos was currently serving his second tour overseas, and their nightly video calls were the highlight of Maria's day, the only thing that made the loneliness bearable. She had been married to David for 8 years, and in that time, she had learned to be strong, independent, and resilient. But she had also learned to be cautious, especially as a Latina woman living in a community where she sometimes felt like an outsider despite her education, her profession, and her husband's military service. David had always told her to be careful during traffic stops, to keep her hands visible, to be respectful but firm about her rights. As Maria turned onto Maple Street, just 3 blocks from her modest 2-bedroom home, she noticed the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart sank as she realized she was being pulled over, though she couldn't understand why. She had been driving exactly the speed limit, had come to complete stops at every sign, and her car registration and insurance were current. Nevertheless, she carefully pulled over to the curb, turned off her engine, and placed her hands on the steering wheel exactly as David had taught her. Officer Jake Morrison, 28, approached Maria's vehicle with the swagger of someone who believed his badge made him untouchable. He was relatively new to the force, having joined the Riverside Police Department just 18 months earlier, after washing out of the military during basic training. Morrison carried a chip on his shoulder about his failed military career, and he often took out his frustrations on civilians, especially those he perceived as vulnerable or different. Morrison had a reputation among his colleagues for being aggressive and confrontational, but he was also known for writing a lot of tickets and making arrests, which his supervisors mistook for dedication rather than recognizing it as a pattern of abuse. He had received several complaints from citizens, but they had all been dismissed or buried in paperwork. Tonight, however, his luck was about to run out. "License and registration," Morrison barked as he approached Maria's window, his hand resting conspicuously on his service weapon, despite the fact that Maria posed no threat whatsoever. "Of course, officer," Maria replied calmly, reaching slowly for her purse to retrieve her documents. "May I ask why you pulled me over? I don't believe I was speeding or violating any traffic laws." Morrison's eyes narrowed at what he perceived as a challenge to his authority. "Don't question me, lady. Just give me your license and registration and keep your mouth shut unless I ask you a direct question." Maria felt a chill run down her spine at the officer's hostile tone, but she complied with his demands, handing over her driver's license and vehicle registration with steady hands. She watched as Morrison examined her documents with exaggerated scrutiny, clearly looking for any excuse to escalate the situation. "Maria Santos," Morrison read aloud, his voice dripping with disdain. "What kind of name is that? You from around here, or are you one of those illegals causing problems in our community?" The question hit Maria like a slap in the face. She was a third-generation American citizen, born and raised in California, with a master's degree in education and a spotless record. Her husband was literally fighting for this country while she worked to educate its children, but Morrison's words revealed the ugly prejudice that lurked beneath his badge. "I'm an American citizen officer," Maria replied, her voice remaining steady despite her growing anger. "My husband is Captain David Santos, currently deployed with the 82nd Airborne Division in Afghanistan. I'm a high school teacher here in Riverside, and I've lived in this community for over 5 years. Morrison's expression darkened further at the mention of Maria's military connections. His own failure to complete basic training was a source of deep shame and resentment, and hearing about her husband's success in the military only inflamed his anger. "I don't care if your husband is a general," Morrison snarled, his professionalism completely abandoned now. "Right now you're dealing with me, and I think you've been drinking. Step out of the vehicle for a sobriety test." Maria was stunned by the accusation. She hadn't had so much as a sip of alcohol in months, and there was absolutely no basis for Morrison's suspicion other than his obvious desire to humiliate and intimidate her. She knew her rights, and she knew that she was not required to submit to field sobriety tests without probable cause. "Officer, I haven't been drinking," Maria said firmly. "I'm coming home from work, and I have every right to ask what probable cause you have for requesting a sobriety test. I've been completely cooperative, and I haven't violated any traffic laws." Morrison's face turned red with rage at what he perceived as defiance. In his twisted worldview, any civilian who dared to assert their constitutional rights was automatically guilty of something and deserving of punishment. "Get out of the car now, or I'll drag you out," Morrison shouted, his hand moving to his taser. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and resisting arrest." Maria realized that the situation was spiraling completely out of control, and she made a decision that would change everything. With her phone still in her lap from her earlier attempt to call David, she quickly activated the video recording function and began filming the encounter. She had heard too many stories about police misconduct being covered up or denied, and she was determined to document whatever was about to happen. "I'm recording this interaction for my own protection," Maria announced, clearly holding her phone so that both she and Morrison were visible in the frame. "I am not resisting arrest, I am not obstructing justice, and I am asserting my constitutional rights as an American citizen." The sight of the camera sent Morrison into an absolute fury. In his mind, Maria had just committed the ultimate act of disrespect by daring to hold him accountable for his actions. "Turn off that camera right now," Morrison screamed, reaching through the car window to grab Maria's phone. "You have no right to record me. I'm a police officer." Maria pulled her phone away from Morrison's grasping hands, continuing to record as she spoke. "I absolutely have the right to record this interaction. The Supreme Court has ruled that citizens have a First Amendment right to film police officers in the performance of their duties." Morrison's response was swift and brutal. Without warning, he drew his taser and fired it directly at Maria through the open car window. The electrical current coursed through her body, causing her to convulse and scream in agony as she collapsed against her steering wheel. The phone flew from her hands and clattered to the floor of the car, but it continued recording the entire assault. "Stop resisting," Morrison shouted, even though Maria was clearly incapacitated by the electrical shock and posed no threat to anyone. He yanked open her car door and grabbed her by the hair, dragging her from the vehicle and throwing her to the ground on the rough asphalt. Maria's body was still twitching from the electrical shock as Morrison forced her face down on the pavement, pressing his knee into her back with unnecessary force. She could taste blood in her mouth where she had bitten her tongue during the tasing, and she could feel the asphalt scraping against her cheek as Morrison roughly handcuffed her hands behind her back. "Please!" Maria gasped, struggling to breathe with Morrison's weight pressing down on her. "I'm pregnant. You're hurting my baby." This revelation should have caused any reasonable officer to immediately reassess the situation and provide medical assistance. Instead, Morrison seemed to take sadistic pleasure in Maria's vulnerability. "Should have thought about that before you decided to resist arrest and disrespect a police officer," Morrison sneered, pressing his knee harder into her back. "Maybe this will teach you some respect for authority." What Morrison didn't know was that Maria's phone had automatically uploaded the video to her cloud storage account, and it had also sent an emergency alert to her emergency contacts, including her husband David in Afghanistan. Despite being thousands of miles away, David immediately began making phone calls to every contact he had in law enforcement and military circles. One of those contacts was Police Chief Martinez, a 25-year veteran of law enforcement who had served alongside David's father in the Marines during the Gulf War. Chief Martinez had been David's mentor when he was considering a career in law enforcement before ultimately choosing the military, and the two families had remained close over the years. David's frantic phone call reached Chief Martinez just as he was finishing dinner with his family. "Chief Martinez, this is David Santos. I'm calling from Afghanistan and I need your help immediately. My wife Maria is being assaulted by one of your officers right now on Maple Street. She was recording the interaction, and I just received an emergency alert with video footage. Chief Martinez had known David since he was a teenager, and he had never heard such desperation and fear in the young man's voice. "David, slow down and tell me exactly what's happening. I'm already heading to my car." As David quickly explained the situation, Chief Martinez was simultaneously pulling up the emergency dispatch logs on his phone. He could see that Officer Morrison had called in a traffic stop on Maple Street, but there was no mention of any arrest or use of force. This discrepancy immediately raised red flags for the experienced chief. "David, I'm en route to the scene right now," Chief Martinez said as he started his unmarked patrol car and activated his emergency lights. "I want you to know that if what you're telling me is accurate, this officer will face the full consequences of his actions. Your wife will be protected and justice will be served." Chief Martinez had built his career on the principle that police officers must be held to the highest standards of conduct, and he had zero tolerance for officers who abused their authority or violated citizens' rights. He had seen too many departments destroyed by corruption and misconduct, and he was determined that Riverside PD would be different. As he raced through the streets toward Maple Street, Chief Martinez was already formulating his response. He called for backup units, requested an ambulance to check on Maria's condition, and contacted the Internal Affairs Division to begin an immediate investigation. He also called the district attorney's office to put them on notice that criminal charges might be forthcoming. Meanwhile, on Maple Street, Morrison was continuing his assault on Maria, seemingly oblivious to the fact that his career was about to come to an abrupt end. He had forced Maria to sit on the curb while he searched her car without a warrant, looking for any evidence he could use to justify his actions. "Where are the drugs?" Morrison demanded, throwing Maria's belongings onto the street. "I know you're hiding something. Nobody acts this suspicious unless they're guilty of something." Maria, still recovering from the effects of the taser, tried to maintain her composure despite the pain and humiliation. "Officer, I'm a high school teacher. I don't use drugs and I haven't committed any crimes. You've assaulted me without cause, and I'm going to file a complaint against you." Morrison laughed cruelly at her threat. "Go ahead and complain. Nobody's going to believe a word you say against a police officer. It's your word against mine, and I've got the badge." What Morrison didn't realize was that Maria's phone was still recording from where it had fallen in the car, capturing every word of his threats and admissions. He also didn't notice the growing number of neighbors who had come out of their houses to witness the commotion, several of whom were also recording the incident with their own phones. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived across the street, approached the scene with her own phone recording. "Officer, this woman is my neighbor. She's a teacher, and her husband is deployed overseas. Why are you treating her like this?" Morrison whirled around to face the elderly woman, his hand moving instinctively to his weapon. "Back off, lady, or you'll be next. This is police business, and you need to get back in your house before I arrest you for interfering with an investigation." The threat against Mrs. Henderson was the final straw for several other neighbors who began calling 911 to report what they were witnessing. The emergency dispatch center was suddenly flooded with calls about an officer who was out of control and threatening innocent civilians. Exactly 7 minutes after David's phone call, Chief Martinez's patrol car came screaming down Maple Street with lights flashing and sirens wailing. He could see the scene unfolding before him. Maria sitting on the curb in handcuffs, Morrison standing over her in an aggressive posture, and several neighbors recording everything with their phones. Chief Martinez had seen enough police misconduct cases to recognize the signs immediately. Morrison's body language, the lack of any apparent crime scene, and the obvious distress of the victim all pointed to a clear case of excessive force and abuse of authority. "Morrison," Chief Martinez barked as he stepped out of his car, "step away from the suspect immediately and report to me." Morrison's face went white as he realized that his supervisor had arrived on scene. He had been so caught up in his power trip that he hadn't even noticed the approaching sirens. "Chief, I've got everything under control here," Morrison said, trying to sound professional. "This suspect was resisting arrest and interfering with my investigation." Chief Martinez walked directly to Maria, who was still sitting on the curb with tears streaming down her face. "Ma'am, I'm Chief Martinez. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm pregnant," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible. "He tased me and threw me to the ground. I think I might be bleeding." The mention of pregnancy sent a chill through Chief Martinez. The use of a taser on a pregnant woman was not only potentially deadly, but also a clear violation of department policy, except in the most extreme circumstances. "Morrison, remove those handcuffs immediately," Chief Martinez ordered, "and explain to me right now what probable cause you had for this arrest." As Morrison fumbled with the handcuff keys, his story began to fall apart. She was driving suspiciously, and I suspected she might be under the influence. When I asked her to step out for a sobriety test, she became combative and started recording me. Chief Martinez's expression grew darker with each word. Officer Morrison recording police interactions is a constitutional right, and I don't see any evidence of impaired driving or combative behavior. What I do see is a pregnant woman who appears to have been assaulted. As the handcuffs were removed from Maria's wrists, Chief Martinez helped her to her feet and guided her to his patrol car where she could sit comfortably. "Mrs. Santos, I want you to know that I've spoken with your husband, and he's very concerned about you. Can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Maria, still shaking from the ordeal, recounted the entire incident from the initial traffic stop through Morrison's assault. As she spoke, Chief Martinez's anger grew, but he maintained his professional demeanor while taking detailed notes. "Mrs. Santos, I understand you were recording this interaction. Is that correct?" "Yes," Maria replied, pointing to her car. "My phone should still be recording. It fell when he tased me, but it was still running." Chief Martinez retrieved Maria's phone and immediately secured it as evidence. He could see that the video was still recording, and a quick review of the footage confirmed everything Maria had told him. The video clearly showed Morrison's unprovoked aggression, his illegal demands, and his brutal assault on an innocent woman. By this time, the ambulance had arrived, and paramedics were examining Maria to ensure that neither she nor her unborn child had been seriously injured by the tasing. Chief Martinez also called for a female officer to assist Maria and provide her with support during this traumatic experience. "Morrison," Chief Martinez said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you are hereby suspended from duty pending a full investigation. You will surrender your badge, your weapon, and all department equipment immediately." Morrison's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, and finally fear, as he realized the magnitude of his situation. "Chief, you can't do this to me. I was just doing my job." She was being disrespectful, and Officer Morrison Chief Martinez interrupted. "You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right. Anything you say from this point forward can and will be used against you in criminal proceedings." The realization that he was about to be arrested hit Morrison like a physical blow. "Criminal proceedings, Chief? This is just a misunderstanding. I made a mistake, but you assaulted a pregnant woman with a taser without justification," Chief Martinez said coldly. "You violated her constitutional rights, you filed a false report, and you threatened witnesses. These aren't mistakes, they're crimes." Within an hour of Chief Martinez's arrival, Morrison was under arrest and facing multiple felony charges, including assault with a deadly weapon, violation of civil rights under color of authority, and filing false police reports. The district attorney, who had been contacted by Chief Martinez, arrived on scene to personally oversee the case and ensure that justice was served. Maria was taken to the hospital for a thorough examination where doctors confirmed that both she and her baby were unharmed despite the trauma they had endured. Chief Martinez personally accompanied her to the hospital and stayed until David could be reached via video call to speak with his wife and receive updates on her condition. "Mrs. Santos," Chief Martinez said as they waited for the doctor's final report, "I want you to know that what happened to you tonight is not representative of the Riverside Police Department or the vast majority of officers who serve this community with honor and integrity. Officer Morrison's actions were criminal, and he will face the full consequences of his behavior." Maria nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "Chief Martinez, I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. No one should have to go through what I experienced tonight." "I completely agree," Chief Martinez replied. "This incident will result in a comprehensive review of our training procedures, our use of force policies, and our hiring practices. We will also be implementing mandatory body cameras for all officers and enhanced oversight procedures to prevent future incidents." True to his word, Chief Martinez launched a department-wide investigation that revealed Morrison had a pattern of aggressive behavior that had been overlooked by previous supervisors. Several other victims came forward with similar stories of harassment and excessive force, leading to additional charges against Morrison and disciplinary action against the supervisors who had failed to address his misconduct. Morrison was ultimately convicted on all charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was also required to pay substantial damages to Maria and the other victims of his abuse. His conviction sent a clear message throughout the law enforcement community that police misconduct would not be tolerated in Riverside. Chief Martinez used the incident as a catalyst for comprehensive police reform. He implemented new training programs focused on de-escalation and constitutional rights, established an independent civilian oversight board, and created a victim advocacy program to support those who had been mistreated by law enforcement. Maria became an advocate for police accountability and victims' rights, working with Chief Martinez and community leaders to ensure that the reforms were meaningful and lasting. She also testified before the state legislature in support of stronger laws protecting citizens who record police interactions. 6 months after the incident, David returned from his deployment to find a community that had been transformed by his wife's courage and Chief Martinez's commitment to justice. The Riverside Police Department had become a model for other agencies, demonstrating that accountability and reform were possible when leaders had the courage to do what was right. I never imagined that 7 minutes could change so much, Maria reflected as she and David walked through their neighborhood on a quiet evening, her hand resting on her growing belly. But sometimes, standing up for what's right, even when you're scared, can make all the difference. David squeezed her hand gently. You showed incredible courage that night. You could have just accepted the abuse and moved on, but you chose to fight back and hold that officer accountable. Because of your bravery, other people won't have to go through what you experienced. Chief Martinez, who had become a close friend of the Santos family, often said that Maria's case had taught him that true leadership meant being willing to confront uncomfortable truths and make difficult decisions. Police officers are given tremendous power and authority, he would tell new recruits, and with that power comes an absolute responsibility to protect and serve all members of our community with dignity and respect. The video of Morrison's assault on Maria became a powerful tool for police training programs across the country, demonstrating the devastating consequences of unchecked authority and the importance of constitutional rights. It also served as a reminder that in the age of smartphones and social media, police misconduct could no longer be hidden or ignored. 7 minutes between a phone call and the arrival of justice. 7 minutes between abuse and accountability. 7 minutes between despair and hope. Sometimes those 7 minutes can expose the worst in humanity while simultaneously revealing the best. Maria's courage to record her assault, David's determination to protect his wife from thousands of miles away, and Chief Martinez's commitment to justice all combined to create a moment of transformation that rippled far beyond one small community. The power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming authority, can indeed change everything, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us.